Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back. I'm your host, Basile of the Baltimore Guys, and today joining me is Executive Director at the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, also known as LEAP. I have retired Major Neill Franklin. Mr. Franklin, thank you for joining me, man, on the Baltimore Guys. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Basile.
So if you could, just give me a quick description of what LEAP is and what some of the services, I guess you can say, you guys offer over there.
Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization, national and international, but most of our work here is done here in the U.S. Organization of criminal justice professionals, that's police, prosecutors, judges, corrections officials, federal agents, who have worked on the front lines of the war on drugs throughout our careers. And now we're trying to end it. Disastrous prohibition policies that didn't work with alcohol prohibition. I don't know why we ever would have thought they would work with drugs that we're dealing with now. And so we're trying to end it all, which would also end our enormous incarceration appetite. It would also help us deal with these problematic products that are flowing in our neighborhoods, right? We're dealing with fentanyl today, and who knows what will come up tomorrow.
Right, that study came out that said 72,000 people overdosed.
Absolutely, man.
On it. It's just crazy.
You can't regulate or implement quality control standards to something that you prohibit, because you literally turn over all control, time, use, place, restrictions, quality control measures. You turn all of that over to criminal gangs and organizations, and they do whatever they want to do with it. So it's not going to be a pretty picture, as we've seen. So we work to undo these disastrous policies, which would also dramatically reduce the violence that we see in our neighborhoods and on our street corners with our gangs and our crews fighting for real estate, man, as they sell their products. In addition to that, again, the problem products that we have, potency rates, you name it. Just yesterday, New Haven, Connecticut, we're dealing with, I think it's around 75 people now in a park where they believe the synthetic marijuana, they call it synthetic marijuana, right, has nothing to do with marijuana, so, right, so people know that. But what it is, it's a chemical-based product that people use. They call it K2, they call it Spice. These are some of the names that's given it. And it was given out to these people in this park, and we've got over 70 people who are now having health issues, serious health issues, where emergency responders had to come to this park to deal with these people. This is a product of prohibition policies, because here we have a product that was given out to all these people and nobody knows what the hell it was.
Right. It's crazy because, I mean, and people, too, I think they get it because it's cheaper, right? Is it somewhat cheaper?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, well, it depends. But for the most part, on the illicit market, it's more expensive than what it would be in a regulated market. And the reason being is overhead is enormous when you're talking about constantly bailing out your employees who are getting arrested. When you're talking about, shipping products from whether it's Mexico or some other country, and the cost of that, how much you're losing along the way. The cartels factor in a known percentage of products that will be lost due to government seizures, due to the police, finding what they're shipping. So they factor that in and build it into their cost, just like any other company. But there's a lot of underlying cost in running an illegal business. If it were legal, the overall prices would be much less, mm-hmm, until we start adding taxes to it. That's what we're seeing.
Good old
with the
taxes.
Marijuana industry. Yeah.
So you're a retired major.
Yeah.
Former part of the law enforcement division. How many years, mm-hmm, did you serve?
34.
34.
With 3 different agencies. I first worked with the Maryland State Police, retired from there officially as a major. Mm-hmm. Then I went on to Baltimore City as the head of training. Then I went on to another agency for 6 years after that, total 34.
Man, 34 years, that's a long time. That's older than me still. I'm not trying to, show your age or anything, but hey, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm up there.
But so can I just ask, what made you want to become a police officer?
I wasn't one of these kids that grew up, like with this desire to be a cop. My brother went into the Maryland State Police before I did, a few years before I did. So I got to see firsthand, what he was experiencing. Went on a couple of ride-alongs with him, and I said, that's kind of interesting. So as soon as I graduated from high school, 2 months after that, I was in the cadet program for the Maryland State Police. Just literally, it was kind of like let me give it a shot, do kind of like a test thing, because I had actually started filling out the paperwork and almost signed on the dotted line for the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the Air Force Academy, I changed my mind. I kind of like thought, well, if I go in the Air Force, I've got to commit so many years to them.
Right.
I said, state police, I can quit if I don't like it. So, well, I stuck with it.
34 years, man. So when you were in there, though, when you got in, was there any goals that you had when joining the police department? Did you have any sort of like, when I get in here, I'm hoping to do this or that?
Yeah, well, kind of when I got in initially, like the desk sergeant was God. You graduate from the police academy, and that first level of serious supervision, where it seems like this person is controlling just about every aspect of your life, was that desk sergeant. Right? That was my goal. Make sergeant, retire as a sergeant, and I'm good. But as time went on, and I started running into some guys that worked in the same barrack that I did, in the basement, in the dark, coming all hours of the day and night. These were the narcs.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, and they were driving the fancy cars and stuff. I'm like, I might give that a shot. I said, that seems pretty cool. It wasn't some strategic career decision process that I had, right? It was all about what was cool, what was exciting, adrenaline, that sort of thing. And so I went in narcotics and started working undercover.
So speaking of what was cool, did family and friends, were they judgmental about your decision to join the police department, or they
were all
very
for it,
supportive?
man.
They're all supportive.
See, you got to understand something. Back in the 1970s, it was different.
Mm-hmm.
It's nowhere like it is today.
Well, I was going to lead to that soon.
I mean, back in the 1970s, of course, you were just somebody's dream back then, right? I very seldom, if ever, heard a negative comment from the public about the police. It was still at the very beginning of what we know today as the war on drugs. Right? Richard Nixon in the early 1970s actually coined that phrase, mm-hmm. the war on drugs. And so we had not yet begun the journey of mass incarceration in this country. Don't get me wrong, we've always locked up a lot of people in the United States. Mm-hmm. But back then, in the 1970s and the mid-70s, it was nothing compared to what it is now regarding our incarceration rate. So relationships between police and community, between the black community, have always been somewhat problematic. Mm-hmm. But today, extremely problematic for a number of reasons.
Well, speaking on today, I mean, the viral video that came out of the officer who had assaulted the guy or punched the guy.
The guy. This was a serious beating.
He beat him up, basically. And the guy didn't even fight back. And apparently this guy had issues with this gentleman previously before this. So obviously these two knew each other.
Yeah.
Whether this was before the guy joined the police department, who knows? But he was suspended for it. And I just wanted to know, could you speak on the community relations, especially back then when you were there, and what has changed since then to this moment? Because, I mean, I know we have cell phone cameras out that capture a lot of things, and the majority of the time it captures always the bad stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's always that argument, there's no good cop, bad cop argument.
So when I started with Baltimore City, it was a head of training. I came in as a head of training in the year 2000. Because of the war on drugs, we had already had a very high homicide rate in Baltimore. We were dealing with some other issues, police community relation-wise. But it really started to get bad at the beginning of the 2000s. And my point is this. This is when we started down this road of zero tolerance policing. We just had a recent Department of Justice investigation in Baltimore because of its policing practices. And it was a scathing report. Now, the bulk of this report was about the early 2000s, in going into, the mid 2000s, around 2012 to 2014 and so on. But a critical year was in 2005, dealing with zero tolerance policing. Martin O'Malley was the mayor back then. I had since moved on to the Maryland Transit Police Department, but things were set in motion. And in 2005, this police department arrested so many of its citizens. Put it this way: the ACLU ended up suing, along with some others, suing the Baltimore Police Department.
Yeah.
For arrests that were being made where there was no probable cause. Now, understand something. During that year, 22% of the people arrested by Baltimore City police officers, there was no probable cause for the arrest that was made. The closest jurisdiction, county in this state, that comes closest to Baltimore City's arrests where no charges were eventually preferred is Prince George's County. And Prince George's County has had decades of problems with policing. But their number was around 2% of their arrests that were made during that year, no charges were preferred. 2% versus 22%.
Right.
That's a big difference.
Right.
And so we're talking tens of thousands of arrests being made in Baltimore City. This zero tolerance policing that went into effect and dealt with a lot of unconstitutional practices, a lot of Fourth Amendment violations of people being searched, again, without probable cause, in the middle of the street, degrading, young men and women being sat down on a curb, many times in the rain and the snow.
Right.
Just the dehumanization of its citizens by the police department was significant in furthering the gap, which was already stretched between police and community. Here we are today with, the consent decree that was put in place by the Department of Justice in Baltimore City. And here we are where we've had more training, more oversight, more, but yet you have an officer like you were just talking about. I think his name is Williams.
Yeah, Williams, Officer
Who
Williams.
just started beating the crap out of this
dude,
guy.
Right.
And it really doesn't sit well with what we're trying to do with police and community. And I tell you, the police cannot be effective in solving violent crime in Baltimore City or any city in this country unless you've got really, really good police-community relations, because the bulk of the information you need in solving violent crime comes from the community. And if the community doesn't trust you, they're not going to give you any information. They'll deal with the issues they got to deal with in their communities and in their neighborhoods. They'll literally put up with the violence and deal with the violence before they go to the police with information.
Yeah, that's what. So I had an opportunity to go. I guess you can call it an opportunity. I went and filmed the Unite the Right rally for production company, and shout out to Lava Bean Productions. But I went out there in D.C. and first of all, the numbers of what the right, people was horrifically off. They were horrifically outnumbered.
Right.
So, but the majority of the time I was with the counter protests and we were filming, and I just noticed, the cops were just there to try and keep the peace, make sure everyone was safe, but they got a majority of the insults and the assaults. I mean, there was one point where I was standing near the gate on Lafayette, which is right near Lafayette Park, which is right near the White House, across from the White House. And, Antifa was there, and then basically, I mean, they were just throwing eggs and, what do they call it? Fart bombs or whatever, just stuff. And then you can just see the look on the cop's face. Like a couple of times I would ask the cops, like, hey, where media can go here, media can come here, and where media can go. And they were just like, look, man, I don't know. He's like, you can just see the dread in their face. Like, look, I don't even want to deal with today.
Don't want to be here.
Yeah, I'm just here because I got to provide for my family, or I need a paycheck, or I need a steady living. And, the police department, I mean, guaranteed pay, pension, health care. There's a lot of benefits that, come with being a police officer. And people, well, I'd asked you about your family and friends, how they felt about it, because nowadays it seems that if you join the police department, it's a terrible thing to do, because it's like, oh, how can you do this? Why would you choose this decision? And I'm not gonna lie. I always do, because there are people, especially black officers, who are out there. Look, man, they just want to do their job and go home.
Yeah.
If they don't have to deal with a shooting, don't have to deal with a stabbing, assault, or whatever, good day for them. Some of my closest friends are police officers, and I don't look at them any sort of way just because they chose this profession. It's what they had to do. They have families. They have stuff to look forward to in life, and it's a job that they have to do. But now it seems that we as society are, especially for black people, you make that decision to join the police department. It's almost looked at as a betrayal.
The war on drugs is the main reason we're having this problem, by far. Let me explain something to you. The only negative thing I have to say, really, about my 34-year career is my participation in the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. The numbers of people that I locked up who were just merely good people who like to smoke a little bit of weed. Mm-hmm. By and far, most of the people any narc ever locks up is for marijuana, because that's the beginning to trying to get close to other people and so on. Because so many people use weed.
Right.
The numbers of people that we've arrested, the violence that we're seeing in our neighborhoods and on our streets is because, these gangs and crews and the cartels, all mixing, fighting each other for street corners and for real estate. Guns become tools of the trade because I got to protect my product, I got to protect my people, I got to protect my cash, mm-hmm. right? And since it's illegal, I can't go to the police for any of that, right? So it's all on us to do that, right? All on the guy in the corner to do that. The vast majority of the problems we're having, don't get me wrong, we've got some serious social problems in community today. Everything from poor education, no education, housing, health care, nutrition, jobs, you name it. Yeah, we've got problems, mental health issues, mm-hmm. and so on. But the war on drugs not only contributes to a lot of those challenges that we have, but it takes limited resources away from those needs. Cops, courtrooms, and prisons for fighting the war on drugs, at minimum, $50 billion a year in this country. We have no idea what the indirect cost is. That's direct cost. We have no idea what the indirect cost is, but we do know this. It's at least 3 times more. Mm. I mean, when you're talking about loss in the financial community, everything from insurance, and think about this. People who are addicted to drugs like heroin, you know how much crime they commit because they need to find the money to get the drugs that they believe they need? Mm-hmm. The robberies, the burglaries, the thefts, you name it. It's just a long list of carnage that follows that. If we were to treat addiction as the health issue and mental health issue that it is, we wouldn't be dealing with all this stuff. And that's just a small part of it. But the foundation to the separation or the inability for police and community to come together, the foundation of that is the war on drugs. It is drug prohibition policies. Remember I said, my 34-year career, one negative thing I have to say is enforcing these policies. Because let me tell you, nobody in any community is going to be mad at a cop for trying to find out who's committing the murders, who's committing the rapes, who's victimizing children, who's committing burglaries, who's sticking people up. There ain't nobody in anyone's community that's going to be mad at that. But when you're going into a community with the orders from your command that says clear the corners, well, how am I going to do that without violating people's rights? I don't care how you do it, just clear the corners. You just go in and you just start arresting people for all kinds of chicken crap stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw Baltimore Uprising. That was on HBO.
Yeah.
There was that scene where the female cop was driving, and they were kids just standing there on the corner, and then she makes the comment, they're probably selling drugs.
Yeah, it's all about drugs, man.
And it's kind of like, you don't know
You
that.
don't
Like,
know.
why would you? But that's the to your point. That's the problem, because now we're this war on drugs. Now you just assume every person that's standing on the corner, oh, they're probably selling drugs. Man, I don't want to stay in the house all day.
There's no air
Especially
conditioning in the house
especially
in the
where
summertime.
I'm living in this row home. If you just, I mean, you look at that corner, you think the kids, okay, let me not get, I'm just going to stay in here in the house all day, so I don't get any assumptions like that. No, I mean, you want to be free. You want to live how you live your life. So,
Look, when I was a kid, I'm a kid of the 60s in Baltimore. I grew up in Reservoir Hill. My mother still lives in the same house, right? When we were out running around, standing on the corners, doing what we did back in the 60s as kids, no cop ever thought that we were out there selling dope. Okay, we may have been throwing some rocks at buses, throwing apples at buses, or doing something mischievous, or getting into the fights that we do from time to time, but there weren't any guns involved. My point is this. That was pre-war on drugs. So the cops didn't ride down the street, as you just said, with this thought, what are these guys doing on the corner? Why are they standing on the corner? What are they selling? What are they doing? It wasn't that. Cop didn't ride down the street, wind the window down, and say, "Get the F off my corner." Cop would ride down the street, wind the window down. You know what would happen? We'd end up walking over to the car. "What's up, Reds?" That was one of the cops in the neighborhood. "What's up, Reds? How's it going?" And we rap for a bit and go on about our business and stuff, right? But it's different today. The war on drugs. Just about every cop that's riding up and down the streets in Baltimore City right now, the description that you said, you see the young guys on the corner, young cats on the corner, or whatever, sitting on a stoop. You know what's going through that cop's mind? How can I search these boys? What can I come up with to get into their pockets? I see a car cruising down the street, pull up to a corner. Maybe it's a guy just rapping with a buddy of his as he pulls up to the curb. Cops coming up, what do they think? How can I search this car? What ruse can I use? What can I say? Will they give me a consent search? That's the thought process. 95% of the time, all centered around the war on drugs and these failed policies. Take that away, and what do you have? Now you got cops thinking about, well, I wonder who's committing the burglaries today. I've seen that guy, in that alley a couple times already, and we've already had 5 burglaries in this block. Let me check his cat out and see what he's up to. Thinking about burglaries. Maybe we've had some rapes in the area, right? And that car, there's something about that car, that has popped up. Or take the war on drugs away in that thought process of how can I search these boys? How can I get off the corner? They're selling drugs on. Take all of that away and treat this as a 100% health issue. Now it's the Department of Health and it's education and it's not the cops anymore. Man, you'll see a different city. You'll see a different Chicago. You'll see a different LA. You'll see a different Philadelphia. War on drugs right smack in the middle of all of it.
So speaking on that, the war on drugs, because a lot of, I think still a lot of people don't know that a lot of prisons and jails, they have a quota.
Private
prisons that need to be met and upheld. Is there an incentive too for officers just, they always say, it's the end of the month, watch out because the cops, they got to meet their quota, whether it be tickets, arrest, or whatever the case may be.
2 incentives for police, and I'm talking the patrol officer, I'm talking the officer on the street. There's only 2 incentives. Number 1, good evaluation, right? Because they're measuring me on how many collars I make, how many arrests that I make, right? How many tickets I write. That's how I get promoted. That's how I get a better assignment, So that's number 1, performance being measured in numbers. Number 2 is, from the financial side, I lock somebody up for weed near the end of my shift, I'll get a little bit of overtime. I make this arrest near the end of my shift, I can turn that into 3 hours overtime. So from an overtime perspective, if I make an arrest at the right time, I can get some overtime. Or if I make an arrest, now say I make the arrest because somebody's got couple pieces of rock cocaine or something on it, right? I got the probable cause. I saw everything happening. Me alone as this one officer can make the case. But what do? I got my 5 other buddy officers who are there, but who are not needed for court, but I put them on a report. Now, when the trial comes up, they get summoned to court, and usually it's going to be on their day off, automatic 4 hours overtime. Mm. So that happens a lot. And if the administration is not properly checking it and tracking it and reading reports and asking questions like, well, why you got these 3 officers also summoned to court? You don't need them. You saw and did everything. Why do you need them? Those are the questions that need to be asked, but they don't get asked. So now you've got all these cats coming to court. And all the time on the news you hear about the amount of money that this city, Baltimore, spends on police officer overtime. And that's one of the reasons.
I didn't know. Well, I mean, I guess that's that looking out for your boys.
I used to do it in a different way. See, when I was working the road, I very seldom made any kind of drug arrest when I was working the road. Most of mine came when I was working undercover. Because most of the time you're stopping people, it's about weed. It ain't about anything else but weed. You smell it, it's in the car. And I wasn't going to lock people up when I was on the road. I wasn't locking people up for weed. But the way I got my overtime, I said, if I get 10 hours of overtime every 2 weeks, I can pay for that's my car payment, right? And that's how you think. But I got mine primarily from locking up drunks near the end of my shift. So if I'm working 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night, I could usually, if I work hard and I can usually find somebody, all tanked up on liquor and lock them up around 10:30 in the evening. And then I get a couple hours overtime dealing with that person, right? So you're always thinking about how you can make more money, working overtime. If the programs weren't there were a lot of programs where they're always looking for cops to work overtime, security related and other issues, baseball games and stuff like that. But if that's not there, if it's off season, then you come up with other ways to get that overtime in, and it's locking people up.
What was the training like for you back then, and do you think that the training has changed today, especially with the circumstances that we're in regards to police and community relations?
Let me tell you something. We always hear about training. We need more training. We need this kind of training. We need that kind of training. These cops are in the academy for at least 6 months in this state. 6 months. 40 hours minimum a week, covering all types of subjects. And training is not the issue, not in this state. It's supervision. It's accountability. It's coaching once they hit the street. You see, first of all, when you go through training, at the end of your 6 months, very little do you really retain. It's like any other education or training, right? When you're dumping that amount of information on somebody, very small percentage you actually retain. But it's there, it's in there, it's in the back of your mind. What's important, number one, is your field training. Okay, what is the caliber of the person they pair you up with for the next 2 months when you hit the street? Regarding integrity, regarding the reinforcing the training that you just had, right? Making sure that you're treating people right, coaching you along the way. What is the caliber of the sergeant of your squad? Is that sergeant, is he or she out there day in and day out giving you guidance? Letting you know when you're wrong, complimenting you when you're right, encouraging you to do certain things and not do certain things, holding you accountable when you make a mistake and treating it as a mistake, because we all make mistakes. But then when you do something out of malice, intentional, making sure that you're dealt with appropriately. That's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where we're losing the battle. That's where we've lost the battle. That's where we're continuing to lose. We need good sergeants. We need good field trainers. It ain't about the captains and the majors, and it's not about the police commissioner. Yeah. you've got to have that representation at the top. But let me tell you, if you've got good sergeants, however you go about breeding them, if you got good sergeants out there who are out there day in and day out working with their people, coaching their people, guiding their people, you're not going to have nearly the issues that we have today. And don't get me wrong. Yeah, we got to change what we're asking the police to do. Again, war on drugs, right? War on people is what it really is. We've got to change that. We've got to get rid of that sort of thing. Zero tolerance policing cannot be tolerated. But then at the end of the day, you got good sergeants out there, right? And if you're not a good sergeant, like the one that we've seen in one of the videos here in Baltimore City where you got a sergeant spitting on someone who's been arrested.
Right.
When you end up with sergeants like that, they need to be removed immediately, if not fired. That sergeant should have been fired, not just demoted or whatever. I don't even know if he was demoted, but should have been fired, because it's not just what that sergeant did to that person, to that citizen. It's the example that that sergeant set for his entire squad, right, which then, has long-lasting effects in a negative way. You fire that person. And if they want to sue the department, they sue the department. Who cares? I'd rather have a sergeant who I fired sue me as the commissioner than to have a citizen sue me because of what that sergeant did to them, or what one of the people under that sergeant, what they may do to someone else.
So I'm glad you're bringing up accountability, because like we discussed earlier with that officer who assaulted that gentleman, the sergeant that spitted on somebody, I think in 2015, the Baltimore Sun put out an article saying how much money was spent on police settlements.
Oh.
And but there are other instances where you have, I forget, was it in Minnesota? I forget where it was exactly, where the officer shot the gentleman in the back multiple times. He's not a threat to him. I mean, he was 20 feet away from him. We shot him in cold blood. And I think he ended up getting charged for murder, but there's still instances where they don't get charged. You know what I mean? And there's that questioning of police aren't held accountable because they're police officers. Now, does that, you were saying that, more along the lines of the sergeants and good sergeants too, but as far as like the states, like when you see these crimes, and this is why people always have to pull out their cell phones when something happens, because if something happens and, it's he said, she said, majority of the time the state will go with the police officer.
Yeah.
What needs to be done, in your opinion, as far as upholding this accountability for cops? And for not just this assaults or spitting on citizens, but like for serious stuff such as murder, or there are even some instances, unfortunately, where cops have assaulted women sexually, etc.
Well, let me begin with this. It's just like sometimes I equate managing some of our cops to managing kids, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't hold your kids accountable for the small stuff, watch out, because here comes the big stuff.
Right.
It's the same thing in policing. If you got to hold cops accountable for the small things and responsible for the small things, administratively, and for the work that they do with the citizens out in the neighborhoods and the communities. And then you'll have far less of the serious infractions, by far. We know that. Now, the serious infractions that you're talking about that we're now starting to see on video, this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been occurring for decades, ever since policing's been around in this country. Mm-hmm. But we just haven't had the ability to record as citizens. So we have been believing the stories of cops, whatever it might be, for whatever circumstance. Now that we're able to record this stuff, citizens are recording this stuff left and right. It's starting to come to light. And we have an opportunity now to hold cops accountable for what they do. But there are a number of things that remain problematic, and I'll touch on a couple of them. One would be police officers' Bill of Rights that afford police officers, so much latitude and so many days to seek counsel before they can be questioned, administratively. Now, understand they still have the same rights as any citizen as it relates to the Fifth Amendment. If I think I'm being charged with a crime, whether I'm a cop or a citizen, I have that right. That's a constitutional right that, no, I'm not going to say anything till my attorney is here, right? Or my attorney might tell me not to say anything at all. But there's something else that's called implied immunity that makes it very difficult to criminally prosecute a police officer, especially when there's case law that says if this cop can articulate that they were in fear of their life or in fear that someone else would be seriously harmed or killed, there's a ton of case law supporting that officer, which then prevents them from being prosecuted. We need to change those parameters because right now, if that cop has the ability to articulate a scenario to where they're in fear of their life, whether it's reasonable or not, it falls in their favor. We have to get to a place, was it absolutely necessary for that cop to use deadly force in this case? Was it necessary, right? And the basis for where we are now is that when a cop makes a decision, you have to be able to put yourself into that cop's shoes at that moment with the limited information they may have in making a decision to do A, B, or C literally in a split second. And that can be very difficult to do at times. But again, we have to continue to work on this and establish what is that area of reasonability? What is that area of necessity to not try de-escalation, to not try using the taser, to not try doing this, to not try backing off, before using deadly force. And I'll end with this. A good example is this. We see shooting after shooting after shooting of cops shooting through the windshield of someone's car, and the cop is saying the person tried to run him over, or shooting through the side window saying that the person tried to run him over.
Or the video where the cop was shooting through his own windshield at a car.
Absolutely. In those cases, you got to ask the question, why did you step in front of the car? Why did you place yourself into a dangerous situation, which would then cause you to feel that you had to use deadly force in return?
Right, because any normal person is not going to step in front of a car.
Absolutely. We train you to seek cover. We train you to use the things in your environment to put in between you and the threat. Be it a mailbox, be it a telephone pole, be it a brick wall. Why are you out in the open? Why did you move from a place of cover to out in the open? Why did you step in front of that moving car? These are the things we have to start holding cops accountable for. We need to make it clear that the sanctity of life, everyone's life, is most important. Your life, that person's life, even the person who is a threat or potential threat, even their life. And we've just migrated to a place where we've just have given so much authority and latitude to the police officer. And again, we also got to understand that we have policies in place that have just made our communities extremely dangerous. Again, you'll find I'm going to keep coming back to the war on drugs.
No. Yeah.
Because, again, the prohibition policies, if we did not have the prohibition of drugs, we would not have the cartels doing what they do in Central America, Mexico, and in over 1,000 communities here in the United States. They would not have the money. They would not have the power and control. It's all about the money they get from the drug trade. We would not have the gangs and crews that we have doing what they're doing out there in our neighborhoods today if they didn't have the ability to make so much money so quickly selling dope. If we just were treating this 100% as a health issue, our communities would be a whole lot less violent. Therefore, we would be requiring so much less from the police. And for the most part, we'd be able, as communities, to handle most of our issues within ourselves because we would be healthier as communities in many different ways. But we can begin, even without ending prohibition policies today for the war on drugs, we can begin right here, right now, in holding cops accountable and making sure that we have good sergeants and making sure we're not using quota systems and numbers generated evaluations for our police officers. How about we start holding cops accountable for the absence of crime on their post, in their assigned areas, right? And the only way you'll get to that absence of crime is if you learn how to work with the citizens and be a part of that community, right? And getting the citizens to work with you, then you're able to prevent crime. But the way things are now, cops can't prevent crime the way things are right now because there's no relationship with the community. And there's no way they can do that on their own.
So still staying with accountability, but also you mentioned as far as us as a community doing stuff together. Now, accountability can play a part too with the community as well. Mm-hmm. As far as, hey man, let's not do that. I'm the mindset like let's not give them a reason now to fit that stereotype that they have on us. We can do better. We have the power to do better, etc. You also have, like I was saying earlier, the good cop, bad cop argument. Mm-hmm. It goes both ways. Like it's not there's just people want to say there's no such thing as a good cop. There's some good cops, there's some bad cops. Well, people can say there's some good people, there's some bad people. I mean, it is what it is. But as far as the good people in the police department, I guess you can say, shouldn't it also fall on them to hold these other officers that are not doing or taking the right steps to build community relations, focus on the real crimes and situations, breaking laws or trying to bend the system? Isn't it on them as well to hold these other officers accountable? Now, mind you, I talked with Ed Norris, and he was telling me a lot of complaints that happen are internal, but complaints can only go so far. If
right.
There's if this guy's working with someone bad, it's like, hey, I can request a transfer. Get yourself out of that situation. And I know that stigma, of snitching and whatever, yada, 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 but still something has to be done to hold these guys accountable. Like, look, man, you're not going to do this. Like, you're ruining things that are going there.
You just touched, I'm kind of laughing because you just touched on a nerve and that word you used, snitching, right? Here the cops are so quick to criticize citizens who don't want to snitch on other citizens, right? But yet among their own ranks, they don't snitch on each other. So it's kind of interesting. So the quote unquote good cops, right, having that responsibility to keep their others in check, to complain, to do the things that need to be done, especially if they know a cop is dirty, committing crimes, to get them fired and ousted and so on, all that. I agree with you 100%. It is problematic, especially when, let's the best way to present this is to give you a real life depiction. Detective Joe Crystal, who used to work for the Baltimore Police Department, young detective, reported a sergeant and another police officer assaulting someone they had arrested, in a house. There's a lot to it, as far as some personal stuff going on there with the person they arrested in the house that they were in and so on. But at the end of the day, these two assaulted someone that they had arrested. Detective Joe Crystal, reports it. What happens to him? He gets shunned by the union. He gets shunned by his supervisor and others. He's now considered a snitch, a rat. Other things happen to him. And at the end of the day, he had to quit the department for his safety, safety of his family, and he moved to Florida. Now, if there are other cops watching that scenario who might be considering reporting someone else, reporting on other police officers who are doing wrong, and they see what happens to Joe Crystal, nah, not me. It ain't happening. I'm not doing it. If cops feel that they're not going to get the backing or the support from other cops and management, forget about it. It's not going to happen. Does that make it right? No, it doesn't make it right. And so that takes you to this point here where you hear people saying that there are no good cops. Because you have the cops that are committing the dirt, constitutional violations, committing crimes, gun trace task force as an example, doing other things that are inappropriate between cops and citizens. And then you have the group of cops that stand by and watch it happen. Does that not make them bad cops as well? Especially when it's a crime being committed by their partners or cops that they know, because it's their job to combat crime. Right? No matter who's committing it. No one should be above the law. It's, again, now this is an area that if management delivered a very strong message, saying that we are going to support those who wear the uniform when they come forth and report these types of things occurring, and they demonstrate that they do and that they will, then maybe you'll get some cops coming forward. And then it only takes getting a few to come forward and having a successful, conclusion with that, then others would too. But right now, the environment in the Baltimore Police Department is not conducive of that.
So because, everyone, as we were saying earlier, everyone has someone's back. So you have people in there who are corrupt, who are, making it harder for these good officers, quote unquote, to stand up against such things. It's not like we can vote this guy out, or because how many commissioners have we gone through in the past? Like
it begins with the commissioner. So, say if I were the commissioner, and tomorrow I assume the office. One of the first things I would do is meet with the union. And I'd sit down with the union representatives. I'd say, look, this is what I'm going to fire people for. If you lie on any official document, during any investigation, in any courtroom, sitting on the stand, in any official capacity, if you lie, you're fired. If the level of excessive force is here, you're fired. If you do A, B, C, and D intentionally, I'm not talking about mistakes. We all make mistakes, but if there's malice and it involves a citizen, you're fired. And I lay it out, and then I say, I'd like to have your support with this, because this is going to greatly increase the professionalism of the department. It's going to greatly increase relationships between police and community. And it's going to give your police officers the opportunity to come forward with the confidence, knowing that if they report something that needs to be reported, they will know that I'm going to handle it appropriately, and they will be protected. That would be the first thing that I did. The second thing that I would do is exactly what I told them. So, and I would go back and I have internal affairs, start going back to cases where it's been established that someone has lied. If at all possible, they're fired. If I can do it in a way where I'm not violating law employment law or whatever, I'd fire them. But I guarantee you, every new case that comes forward, if I get a letter from the state's attorney's office that XYZ officer perjured themselves on the stand, and here's the case, Internal Affairs confirms that, and you got to make sure you got the right Internal Affairs commander there. And they confirm that, person's fired. Now, if they want to sue the department, they can sue the department. I'll have a line of police officers going all the way up 83, Interstate 83, out of the city, lining up to sue the department if that's what it takes. But I'd rather have a police officer suing me than a citizen suing me because of my failure to get rid of a police officer, like in the scenario I said about the sergeant who spat upon that person. I don't want citizens suing the department. I don't want them suing the police department, the folks that are supposed to be serving them, right? No. If an employee doesn't do what they're supposed to do, or they do something that's detrimental to the relationships between the police department and the community, that is a violation of law, any of those things, I'm going to fire them. Once you start doing that, things will change. And they will change dramatically, and I think you'll see those good officers, they'll start to smile, and say it's about time. And that's a way to purge the police department of those who are problematic, and it's typically somewhere probably between 10 and 20% of the officers that are working who are problematic. You start getting rid of them, and then you'll start a trend in building a police force of these good officers who now feel empowered to come forward and to do the things and to be responsible and responsive to the community. But that's where it's got to begin. That's the only way you can do it, unless you do what they did in Camden, New Jersey, and that's you just eliminate every police position in the city and rebuild the police department. That's what they did in Camden, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And everyone has to apply as though they're a new employee.
When officers get fired, is there, I guess equated to like the military that, hey, this guy got fired from this department. Like, he can't just go to another department and easily get in, right?
Oh, they go all the time to other departments. That's another problem. That's another problem. But there is a solution for that, mm-hmm. especially when you're dealing with excessive force terminations. Right now, the city, the police department deals with the insurance, for when police officers screw up, right? Make every police officer responsible for their own insurance policy. So we, the city, we'll take the current money that we use for blanket policy and we'll divide it up. We'll give the stipend to every police officer to get your policy. Mm-hmm. This is what we will give you every year to maintain your policy. If you screw up and your policy premium goes up, you pay the difference. Or it might get to a point where that insurance company says you're too much of a liability because you've been sued twice already. We had to pay out. We're dropping your insurance. Now, if you can't get insurance as a police officer, you know what? You can't be hired. I think that's a simple way to do it. The union's going to push back, of course. But think about that. Think about doctors. Think about all the other professions out there where you have to have your bond, you have to have your own insurance for malpractice or whatever. And you know what? If you can't get someone to carry you, or if it becomes too expensive, you can't afford it, and guess what? You're not going to be a police officer.
Right.
But short of that, we need a process where, for instance, in the state of Maryland, the Police Training Commission, where someone gets fired, that training commission says you cannot be hired by any other police department in the state of Maryland. And what will they do? They'll go to Pennsylvania and get hired. And a lot of times we make deals with police officers that we're terminating. If you don't sue us, if you don't do this or don't do that, then we will not divulge any negative information about you. Okay, we'll just go our separate ways, and you'll sign this agreement, we'll sign this agreement. And that's very problematic because then when they do go to Virginia or they do go to Pennsylvania, And then that employer writes back to us and we say, well, we have nothing to say. Very problematic.
That's crazy. That's crazy. But all this leading back to LEAP and the war on drugs being the foundation of this problem that we're seeing. Could you just elaborate on the steps LEAP's taking to help address these issues, to help as far as incarcerations for marijuana, basically, and, you know, just reduce violence and addiction as well?
Yeah. So let me begin with, if you go onto our website, lawenforcementaction.org, and you look under the drug policy tab, and we've got 5 silos of work. One is police community relations, one is incarceration, one is drug policy, one is harm reduction, and the 5th is global issues. Now, if you look under drug policy, one of the first things you'll see is this depiction of a tree. And the trunk and roots of that tree is drug prohibition policies. And among the branches of the tree, you'll see all the things that are directly related to drug prohibition policies. Mass incarceration, police community relations, civil forfeiture. For those people who don't know about civil forfeiture, it's basically the government can take your property, your money, without charging you with a crime and make you prove that your money is innocent. Go figure. But we can do it, and we do it all the time. Immigration issues. You know, among the branches, there are just a host of things that we're dealing with in society right now, mainly within our world of criminal justice, that sit squarely upon this foundation of drug prohibition policies. So you'll see, for instance, in our first silo of work, our speakers, again, who are judges, prosecutors, police officers, corrections officials. So when you look at police community relations, you'll see a bunch of other issues under that heading, right? Many of which we talked about here today. You know, quota systems, you know, use of body cameras, holding accountability, you know, and things such as that, police training, and so on. You look at incarceration, and you'll see things like mandatory minimum sentencing. You know, again, a big part of the foundation for mandatory minimum sentencing, again, is the war on drugs. Right? You can go back into the 1980s, and that's when we started, you know, 3 strikes, you're out. You know, locking people up for life, you know, for marijuana, locking people up for life for a few rocks of crack in some states in this country. When you look at harm reduction, that category, you'll see things like needle exchange. You'll see a whole lot of health-related issues. You know, pre-arrest diversion. Let's get people into treatment instead of getting them into the local detention center or corrections, right? So our speakers have those areas of expertise. We speak about these issues to our policymakers, our senators, our delegates, Congress people. We write op-eds. We speak at conferences. We speak at universities. We do webinars. Any way that we can educate people regarding these failed policies, regarding solutions, all of which will improve public safety, because that's what we're about. We want to improve public safety. So we've just collected a ton of speakers who are police chiefs, they're sheriffs, they're the average officer on the street, they are former U.S. attorneys. I mean, just a whole host of folks. And they do a really good job of educating people regarding the failures within our criminal justice system. So that's what we do. We figure the more people we can educate, you know, the quicker we'll get to this place of change. And again, we speak very critically on things like what you mentioned earlier about the prison industrial complex, where it's a profit industry, and you can invest, literally, you can invest on Wall Street in bodies being incarcerated.
Yeah.
In this country. That makes no sense, man.
Ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. And unfortunately, this administration, where we had begun, during the prior administration in the White House, we had begun to undo private prisons. profit prisons. Now, they've just undone that. At least at the federal level, this administration has made it possible again, for corporations to make money from the incarceration of our citizens. Unreal. So we're going to continue to do that work, and it's just important work. Again, there's no way that this country should be the world's #1 incarcerator when we're supposed to be that beacon, the land of the free. What the hell does that mean? Free from what? It sure doesn't mean free from incarceration, right? But, we shouldn't be that. We should have the least amount of people incarcerated as a country, and but we don't. So, but again, when you go on our website and you look at that depiction of that tree that we have, it will just blow your mind as to how many things that we have posted among the branches, and you'll be, wow, I didn't know that. Even down to, again, the quality of drugs that people are using in our neighborhoods, be it very high potency, be it laced with fentanyl, be it something that it's laced with that will kill you, that will harm you. Accessibility of these drugs to kids, because it's all about money. I don't care who I sell it to. I don't care who I have selling it. As a matter of fact, as someone selling drugs in your neighborhood, it's more advantageous to me to hire kids to do it. They get out of jail quicker. They don't really get penalized, like an adult would. They're less hassle. I can control them better. They go to school. Some of them go to school, so they can sell in schools. They can recruit other kids and bring these other kids to me. I pay them less than what I would pay an adult. Yeah, you don't see that with liquor stores, right? No matter how problematic booze is, we would never ever consider going back to the prohibition days of the 1920s with alcohol. This place, you think it's off the hook now? This country would be way off the hook, especially our cities. And I just want to say this real quick. When we were talking about cops holding other cops accountable and, stepping up, you started to talk a little bit about citizens having responsibility, to do the right thing. 2 quick points. Number one, that takes leaders within the community to rally the community, to lead them to a place of holding each other accountable for the things that they do. But understand this. Whether we're talking Sandtown, Winchester here in Baltimore, whether we're talking someplace over in East Baltimore, whether we're talking Reservoir Hill, whether we're talking Southwest Baltimore, we have poverty, extreme rates of poverty right now where people are in their homes with no electricity, right? No lights, no food, people are hungry, kids are hungry. These kids grow up literally in a 15, 16 square block area, if that much, have never left these areas. And all they know is what occurs in that small piece of real estate. Ain't a whole lot of good happening, especially when there's a void of leadership, whether it's a void of leadership at the community level, but more important, the void of leadership in the household. Why is there a void of leadership in the household? It wasn't back in the 1960s. And you know what? We ain't have no money. Let me tell you, my brother and my sister were also cops who have since retired like me. But my father was a stone criminal. He was a longshoreman. He stole anything he could get his fingers on because he had to do what he had to do when the economy was not good so his family could survive and live, right? When you got kids growing up in a 15 square block area and there's no leadership in the household, because look at the numbers of people we've incarcerated from our communities because of the war on drugs, all through the 1980s, into the 1990s. And still today, the people that we are dragging away from their household. Look, I don't agree with people selling dope on corners, but sometimes when that's all you know, and you've been locked up so many times, for a lot of times for can I say it, bullshit, right? You've been locked up so many times, you can't get a job. Yeah, I'm out on the corner slinging. And I got to do what comes with that. And you know what? Now my sons are seeing that. I get locked up. Now my sons are slinging. Yeah, I mean, we are products of our environment. Until you change the environment for these kids, until you find a way to keep leadership in the household, I don't care how many police you got. I don't care what jobs you give those police to do. The police can't solve this issue. They can only make it worse. And that's what we're doing. We're making it worse. This city has to step up and figure out a way to change a generation of kids. A 15 to 20-year plan is what this city needs for kids. And it doesn't involve the criminal justice system. Get the cops out of it. Education, healthcare, family services, family education, treatment, housing, mental health care. Continue to get the lead paint out of these homes. It's a long list of things. Take the money from the criminal justice system and from prisons and police courtrooms and prisons and put it into those programs. We've got to stabilize households. And I'm saying households because don't talk about the neighborhood, stabilizing a neighborhood or community unless you're talking about stabilizing households, because it's the households that make up the neighborhood. And that's the micro level. You got to start at the micro level. Change a generation of kids. Get them to graduate from high school, right? And that's the path forward, man. And at the same time, got to undo these drug prohibition policies.
Major, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for coming on here. I truly appreciate it. Everyone check out LEAP over at lawenforcementaction.org.
Yes.
And then is there somewhere they can follow you and check out your efforts?
Oh yeah, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. I'm the only Neill Franklin that I know of on both with 2 L's, Neill Franklin, common spelling. And for Twitter, just put a little dot in between Neill and Franklin. But yeah, follow me on both of those. And you can also follow me through processes on the website too.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, so we can continue to give you this great content. Otherwise, take care, and we'll see you next time.